And we're going to begin. Well, welcome to episode 47 of BRC and Friends. It's a podcast where I talk with activists, artists, academics, and adventurers who are committed to making the world a more thoughtful, loving, and just place. Today, I welcome a new friend. We just met today, Tyler Sitt. Tyler is the author of Staying Awake, the Gospel for Changemakers. Full disclosure, I did not read it, so I get to be kind of that. So tell me about I'm not even going to try to fake it. And I will say that both Tyler and I have the same publisher, Chalice Press, so shout out to Chalice Press, who are obviously putting together a great stable of writers, and amazing.
Hello.
But as we start, what I'd like to invite you to just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you are, and just, give us, who is Tyler?
Hey, so my name's Tyler Sitt. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the church planter, which means founder of New City Church in South Minneapolis. New City Church is a church that's led mostly by queer people of color, and it's racially diverse, hugely LGBTQ plus, anti-racist church. New City has been in the news more a little bit recently because New City is in the same neighborhood where the racist murder of George Floyd happened. So that's hugely part of our story and certainly influenced my book as well. I just wrote Staying Awake, the Gospel for Changemakers. It's a book that explores 9 Christian practices that support Christians in showing up for justice and staying in the movement.
That's awesome. I'm so excited. So we have a little bit of a connection. So I was a church planter in San Francisco for 15 years. So that's my main claim to fame. I don't know what that is. So I pastor a more traditional church now, but that was and then my oldest child, Ev, who uses they, them pronouns, they are in Minneapolis now, actually, which I should have been like, what? Oh, and now I feel bad. I'm like,
I love it.
But okay, they're moving back. They are finally moving back home. So yeah, I think after they went to McAllister and then stayed a few years, and after 6 winters, I think they were like, yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
It's been fun. Yeah.
Now, did you grow up there? I mean, where did you grow up there? How'd you get there?
I am Minnesota born and raised. Okay.
Are you really?
Oh gosh, you guys! I grew up next to the lakes and all that. So I grew up in Minnesota. I kind of took 10 years away to do kind of the thing your oldest is doing, it sounds like, and kind of lived all over the world. And then I came back to Minnesota. Okay.
Now, did you grow up in the church, or is that something later in life? Or I mean, I mean, you're a church planter. What's your, in a capsule, what's your story? How did you get to this point where, screw it, I'm going to do my own? That's basically what we all do as church planters. Like, well, I just feel like, for me, it was like, I'm going to create a church that I'd actually go to. I mean, that was always my motivation. No lie. So how did you end up doing what you're doing?
/ like, if you wanted to put in an order for screw it, I'm going to do it on my own t-shirts. I think that could really do well for your podcast. Yeah. Shout out. Yeah. So I grew up, kind of an interesting combination because I grew up hardcore in the church. Like, I was confirmation, I was choir, I was in committees as a teenager, I was leading Sunday school for sure. But I didn't grow up conservative evangelical. And a lot of folks who grew up hardcore in the church grew up in like a tradition that perhaps later left a really sour taste in their mouth. But I grew up in a very like mainline United Methodist church that showed me a lot of love and a lot of safety. And especially for me being a gay Asian growing up in a white Republican town. So I really loved the church and felt something there. And so fast forward to me, like, I live around the world, and then I go to seminary at Candler School of Theology in Georgia. And one of my mentors says, Tyler, you kind of have what it takes to be a church planter because you think like an entrepreneur and you pray like a mystic. And that's all church planters need. And
that's all we need.
All we need.
And you're independently wealthy.
And like 501c3 status would also be a great thing to add into that. Yeah. But that really like set me on a vocational path. And so I really haven't looked away from that ever since.
I think we're twins. I mean, I think I'm older. I think I'm older than you, but I'm just gonna go ahead because
Yes.
I too grew up in a historically Filipino American congregation,
Sure.
Presbyterian in Stockton, and it was all, it was progressive. I didn't know I was in a progressive church until I left, and people were like, "Oh, you're in a progressive church." I'm like, "Okay, whatever you need to
Oh.
call it."
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
and then right, you hear of all, and I kind of feel guilt is too strong. I don't feel guilt, but I kind of like, oh, I had a great experience in the church.
Right.
I don't certainly, because I know like that's the worst thing you can tell to somebody who's just been in this toxic environment is like, well, my experience was great. Like it's not helpful. At the same time, I'm like, this is who it's formed who I am. And so
Yeah.
I just want that to keep going. And that's, yeah,
Absolutely. Wow,
that's
that's really
something.
resonant. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it's kind of like, I mean, certainly New City ministers with a lot of people who have been super burned
sure.
out from the church, like I'm sure your ministries have,
Yeah,
and it's kind of like the way to heal from negative and abusive church, like literally abusive church experiences, is to have positive church experiences and healthy church experiences, not to have zero church at all. Like
yeah,
the healing is like the other side of that, and I think that the people who went before me like really tried to create a healthy experience so that I could create that for other
yeah,
people.
yeah. I've always found that when folks like having to convince people that have come out of that experience, that toxic abusive space, they're always also waiting sometimes for the other shoe to drop.
Right.
And I'm like, well, like it's more
Yeah.
going to be a sandal's going to drop. It's not the
Like
whole
maybe
shoe.
like something with a little heel, like a
Yeah,
pump or
like
like a
it's just
little.
some like little things are going to drop because we're not perfect, but that doesn't mean that we're now like I feel like we could do a whole
So
session
funny.
on this. But I want to talk about your book because I do
Oh
know that
sure.
yeah. So again, people, I'm sorry. This was somewhat last minute, totally on my fault. So I have not read it.
Sure.
I've seen that it's out. So tell me, what's your pitch? Like what tell us, you said it's 9 practices, Christian
Yes.
practices, right? So
Yes.
how did it come about? Your standard book question. How did you like,
Hmm.
why write a
Hmm.
book? Other
Yeah.
than, I think people are saying now everybody's written a book, and I just don't think that's true. As one who's written a book, it is hard work.
For sure.
Yeah. Like, don't just like everybody, it's like, oh, everybody could church plant. Like,
Like,
that's not true either. Anyway, how'd you like, why? And then
that's funny.
yeah, and then how did it get started? And what's the motivation behind it? And then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, I love that. Everyone can church plant. Well, not in my experience, but
Yeah,
everyone can be part of a church plant.
exactly.
Just maybe not the planter, but yeah, I um, so I really love the New City community, and I believe in doing theology as a public act. So it's not like, one person goes and decides on all the things that the church believes and then says like, ta-da, this is it. But really trying to, through conversation, allow for the theology to arise from people and from their experience. So in my experience of pastoring New City Church, which has significant, probably 50%, 40, 50% queer population, like people of color, that the racial demographics of New City match the racial demographics of Minneapolis almost to the percentage point.
Hmm.
Probably 40% of the folks at New City don't actively identify as Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ministering with these folks, and it's like all millennial and Gen Zers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except for my parents, who drive from Chaska, Minnesota
How far is that?
to show up. But as I was ministering in this community, I was talking to a bunch of people who were like, I had thought that I had completely shut the door on Christianity, and now I'm part of this community, and it's like not swung open, but it's like a little crack. There's a little
Yeah.
peak open. So who should I be reading? And don't you dare recommend like yet another very eloquent white straight guy who's going to mansplain what Christianity is. Like tell me who I should be reading. So I looked at my bookshelf, and I had a lot of amazing seminary texts that are written at like ivory tower level, and I have a lot of memoirs and other books that kind of assume that people know what Christianity is or what the church is about. but I didn't really have like a primer, like a 101 course on what Christianity is about that that centers queer people of color. So we wrote it as a community. I wrote the bulk of it, and then community members submitted poetry to include in it, testimonies to include in it. We created like illustrations and comics and graphics. So yeah, it's really a community effort that is trying to inspire people, not just as like individuals, but as members of something, as people who are part of a whole, who are trying to make the world a little bit more like God's liberating love.
Right. So can you run off, can you run off the 9? Like, and I'm where I'm going with this is I'd love to, like, what didn't get in, like what were the pieces are like, oh, is this like worth, like, or which ones created the most tension or were the most liberating, or like, so what are our 9?
So it's a funny story. Just, I guess I could just, okay. So I always get the order wrong. So I want to worship, where it's like,
the worst thing, people are like, so in your book you say, and I'm like, okay, let me go check. Did I say that?
Just to really, no, because I wrote each of the chapters to be able to be read by themselves.
Sure.
It's not sequential. So like, I don't think of them in order, but yeah. Right. So worship, centering marginalized voices, prayer, groups, Sabbath, leadership development, generosity, planting, and putting it all together. So like, it's funny because I chose those 9 because I'm in community and I see that these are the 9 rhythms that are making the biggest difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
But as I've been pitching this book around and talking to other communities. They're like, well, why don't you have a chapter specifically looking at social justice? And it's funny because like for my community and for the ministry that we're in, social justice is such an assumed part of everyone's lives. Like,
so why don't you want to have one on social media? I mean, I know when I started the church, and I'm like, well, because that's just what people do. It's not like I don't got to teach people that.
Thing on eating sandwiches. I don't know. I just assumed that Minnesotans are going to eat sandwiches.
That was going to be a question: is why there's no sandwich eating chapter. But whatever, that's fine. Everybody makes the choices.
You have a question, you just scratch it off slowly.
Oh, my bad. No sandwich comments.
No sandwich comments. Interesting. No, but I mean, as far as people are always like, how do we do ministry with millennials? How do we do ministry with Gen Z? Like, millennials and Gen Z care about making a difference in the world. And it's not really seen as an option on whether or not the church, the ministry of the church speaks to those differences that they're trying to make one way or the other.
Yeah, we've lost that. We've lost that authority a long time ago, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, I think it's just forced many. Like, and I'm in a congregation. I love the church I'm serving. It's older. I'm in a stage of my own pastoral career. Like, I'm in my 50s, and I'm like in this weird middle. I'm an Xer who wants to be not that, but no Xer wants to be. But I think there is this like, tell us how to do it step by step mentality that still exists in a lot of our institutions.
For sure.
Almost no matter how old the people are, right? It's just kind of an institutional DNA. Whereas I'm trying to bring in this, like, well, we're just gonna do it, and we'll figure out how we do that best, and that might change next year, and that's just such a different it's how do you program that? How do you systematize? I'm like, well, you institutionalize flexibility and fluidity, and it's like, but how do you do that? And so I could so this book you're giving guide, like, who's going to read this? Like, who should be reading this? Like, that is it? So should my congregation, would it be good for us to be like, hey, let's take a read of this, because it offers us a way to think about being community and church in the world? Like, who are you hoping is going to read it, or who's being drawn to it at this point?
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote it specifically for folks in my ministry, like activist organizers who are going at justice hard and were so on the edge of burnout. And I was desperately trying to say, like, okay, here's some spiritual practices. Like, please try to create some like soul work as well as social justice work. Please, please, please. But as we've been kind of like testing it out in more and more groups, folks who aren't in, social justice hubs in urban cities have been like clamoring for this book because they're saying like, it's so interesting to hear how Christianity can be approached. It's like the same story of Jesus that we're reading from the same Bible, but it's speaking to these social dynamics in a way that we haven't heard before, in a way that's actually pretty refreshing. So like we really try to do like knowing who we're centering while also being some writing in a way that's like really accessible to people who are outside of it. So if you are like Sally in the white aged congregation and all the church committee talks are about the pipe organ and the carpet color, like this book still has something to speak to you. It just might push in certain ways that it wouldn't for my folks.
Yeah.
But what is Christianity for if not to be helpfully pushed along, you know?
Well, and I've also found, again, I have not read it yet, but I will read it and buy it because that's what we all do for each other. And I think there's just a yearning. I think people intellectually know that what's happening isn't working.
Right.
And just need something to hold on to that says, here's another way. Like here's this yearning, this beckoning into something new and different, especially those in a progressive space who I think who in many ways are open to that a little bit more. But there hasn't been a lot put out to say, here's what this next iteration of what you've experienced might look like. And it sounds like that's kind of what you might be offering to people.
Yeah. I think it's funny because people from the outside always comment like, wow, it seems like this is a really fresh thing. This is a really new thing. Yesterday I did a podcast interview called The Disruptors, and it was looking at people who disrupt the church. And it's like, I didn't intend to disrupt any, and I'm sure this is something you can relate to too. Yeah. Like, I'm not intending to be intentionally disruptive. I'm just looking at the community and saying like, hey, this stuff isn't working anymore. And we got to make something that does work. And so it's kind of like more out of innovation, disruption, not for its own sake, but out of love for the people around me and for what God is doing. And I'm sure you see that in your church too.
I mean, I think those who take bold steps, it doesn't feel as bold to the person, right? It doesn't feel like, so one person's disruption is another person's like, that just totally makes sense to me. That's not really disruptive. Right? I mean, I think that there's always that kind of like, oh, and sometimes that's helped me as I've been like, well, this is obvious, we should be doing this. And people are like, and I'm like, oh, that's right. This actually is like 12 steps ahead.
Right.
Or not even ahead, is 12 steps in a different direction than you've ever gone before. So now I get to make a decision as I'm like, it's one thing if I'm leading a community that's like, yeah, let's do it. And then there's another one if I'm leading this community, it's like, can we just take 2 steps tomorrow and not 12?
Right. God bless them.
And I'm like, okay, we can take, how about 3? Can we do 3? And then we'll do 3 more on Thursday.
Yes. By the time that you're at step 3, you're going to want step 4 anyway.
Exactly.
Might as well take step 6, and then we're at step 10. Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're drinking coffee Coke, and it's just everything's gone out the window. That's my latest thing.
Coke.
Have you seen it?
I've seen it. I'm scared. I'm so scared.
So,
have you had it? Is it good?
Everybody, Bruce does not take. Some people know I've lost like 30 pounds over the last 9 months.
Yeah.
Well, not because. Well, I was gonna say not because I'm vain, because I'm super vain, but not because I was like I'm diet. I mean, I've always had fluctuations in my weight, but it's because my health. My doctor's like, so if you don't want to die, here's what you need to do. Okay. So I shifted. That doesn't mean that I don't put crap in my body still. So I discovered coffee Coke, and it is good.
Sell me.
It is. It is so good. It's the. So I don't know if do you ever watch, what was it, Crazy Stupid Love? And one of the things, so one of the lines that the husband says to the wife and then gets repeated to the other person that he's messing with is, you're the perfect combination of cute and sexy. And Coffee, Coke. There you go.
And that's how you're describing your beverage.
It's the perfect. I have probably an unhealthy relationship with my beverages. This is a little product placement for Phil's Coffee. I don't know if you can't really see the lighting. Yeah. I mean, my oldest child's like, when is Phil's coming to Minneapolis? I'm like, clearly Minneapolis is not cool enough for Phil's Coffee, but
Phil's like started here and then went to y'all and then changed. No, I have no idea. I have no idea. We have a lot.
Anyway,
of
so yeah, give Coffee Coke a chance. Well, it's probably just eating the insides. It's probably, but anytime you have to limit yourself to something, like I limit myself to at least just a one a day. Like I just can't do any more than that.
Yeah,
it's probably not good. Anyway, we digress. So, you're as you kind of thought about these things for the community, which ones are more difficult for you as you're thinking about here's the practices that I'm really speaking back to myself. Here are the ones that I kind of inherently are like, these are the things that I'm really good at. Like for me, I lead a silent prayer reflection every Tuesday night, and I tell folks, I'm not really doing it for them. Like I need structured, like I have to do that every week. Otherwise I will not do it at all.
Yeah.
So
that's the secret, isn't it?
Sometimes it is.
That's the secret.
Sometimes
it
is.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is. So as you were writing this, what are the things that like, oh yeah, this is super me. And these are things like, I've struggled with this.
So it's funny you asked that question, because one of the like real, I think, risks that this book takes is that instead of, it would have been really easy for me to have like one book on just one of those chapters, right? Like one book on worship, one book on centering marginalized voices, because that tends to be how marketing is, like, what is this about? It's about worship. Okay, got it. Yeah. And, like it's a lot easier to sell that way. But in terms of being useful to the community, I wanted to create kind of this like language, these practices of how to be Christian, because in my case, like it's definitely very seasonal. There are some seasons when I'm doing a really good job keeping up with a small group or a close group of people, and then there's some seasons where I'm like, I'm going to go travel and I'll see you never. When the wanderlust just kind of takes control, right? And there are some seasons where I feel like I'm really like on a steep incline for my leadership development, and I'm mentoring other people in that. And then there are other seasons where it's not. And so I wanted to give kind of the spectrum, because people can kind of self-diagnose and self-reflect on like, what is the season that I'm in now? And what does it say that some of these practices are coming a little bit more naturally than others?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how can we make adjustments, including becoming a pastor and then having people come to your silent prayer time on Tuesdays? Like if we can name it, if it can be in front of us, then we can make adjustments for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think our world wants us to be so unidimensional, and that's just, we all know that that's not who we are and how we live, but like you're right, it sells better, it's easier, it's clickable, it's all these things, and it's harder work, and I think that what we're calling people to is the deep work of being community. Totally. I think that's a good segue into this assessment and self-reflection. So as folks know, on this podcast, I love to talk to people, not just about whatever they're working on, but just like other stuff, because we're all fully a lot of things. Like I'm a brander's worst nightmare, because I feel like I have a lot of things to say about a lot of things. And so I just started a podcast that gets,
I think that's the nature of intersectionality though, right?
Oh yeah.
Like the nature of like being a whole person and being able to bring all of that to the table and all of that to the movement means that there's not going to be easily identified categories. So I celebrate that.
I think you're right. I that's why I've always had to have a job and write, because I could never actually fully not all of us can be Barbara Taylor Brown, who's amazing. And I wrote your foreword, or your or
endorsement.
Endorsement. Yes. Well done.
She said, it's so bursting with energy for spirit-led justice that it makes me want a do-over at being Christian.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, bless the Lord. Hallelujah.
People read that as like, oh, interesting. But my Barbara Brett story is, so in our denomination, I got elected moderator, which is kind of like your presiding bishop, I think. And sure. And for those of you that are not involved with churches, it's only a big deal to the people who are part of those churches. Otherwise, nobody else cares. So, but it's a big deal in our, in your like, I'm very important to a very small group of people.
Right.
So I think Barbara had a book that came out around the same time, and I was the youngest moderator ever elected, and so everybody was like excited, la la la. So we were at a couple of events together, speaking, and she comes to me one time. She says, "Bruce, come here." I was like, "Yes, ma'am." And she says, "Bruce," and I said, "Yes." She says, "Slow down." It's like, if you know Barbara, right? That's totally something she'd say.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "You slow down, Barbara Brown Taylor." So, but
is that how you said it? Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yes.
Yeah, that's the mystical response.
Yeah, exactly. Wham. But I always remember because she took the time, and I genuinely felt like we didn't know each other well or anything, but she genuinely was like just observing my spirit, and there was no judgment. It was just
beautiful.
Take a breath, my friend. I'm like, okay, I'll take that from Barbara.
Deal.
Anyway, so where I was going before we went,
I love that story though.
So we're both into Enneagram apparently.
I love it.
Now you're a little more trained. You're more trained. I'm probably more dangerous. So I'm just gonna own that reality. I'm a certified coach for Gallup Strengths, so I love that. I do that as well. But Enneagram. Cool. And as we were talking about this, I know now there's probably a segment that are like, oh God, Enneagram, I'm going to turn this off now, you Enneagram people. And then there's a segment that are like, ears went bling.
Yeah.
So why should people be open to the possibility? Like when folks are like, I hear about this Enneagram thing. I hear you know about it. Yeah. Why? What do you tell people?
I just want to, I want to address personally the segment who is like, oh my gosh, Enneagram people, because half of the folks in Enneagram circles are also like, oh my gosh, Enneagram people. Like, yeah, exactly. So many of us are also rolling our eyes at Enneagram folks, because and several decades ago, the Enneagram was like quite secret and quite personal. Like, people didn't talk about it, people didn't share about it, because the concern was that if people only understood it on a shallow level, people would misuse it and manipulate it. Yeah. And now, like, fast forward to the late 2018, 19, 20, all of a sudden the Enneagram is exploding. There's like Enneagram skits on YouTube and Enneagram Instagrammers and tons of this. Oh. And it's helpful because it's getting the word out, and the Enneagram does help transform a lot of people's lives. But it's not helpful because in the context of an Instagrammer, like the amount of change required, or the amount of really confronting some of your own stuff required, is so shallow that it kind of defeats the purpose of it and just becomes another box for people to put themselves in. Like, and people do this with StrengthsFinders too. Oh, where it's like when people are like, oh, I could never help out with those details. I'm a 7. I can't do details. And it's like, that is such a shallow understanding of 7. And similarly, people in StrengthsFinders are always like, oh, woo is so low on my StrengthsFinders. I could never go and network at this thing. And it's like, get over yourself, That's so funny. There's so much more out there.
So, but tell me if I'm genuinely like, you're a trusted person, you're my pastor. I've been seeing this stuff pop up on Instagram, and I'm like, when is this stuff? But I know you trust it. So why should I engage in this, in taking this assessment, doing some reading, sitting down and talking with somebody? What good is that going to do me can I just go talk to a therapist? And like, yes, that too, but this is also a helpful plan. Like, why should I take that time?
I'm super pro therapy. So
that's right.
if the
It's not
question
either
is,
or.
do I go to a therapist or not? The answer is yes. Always, always. But
Yes.
as far as, so one of the reasons why people get a little pissed off with the Enneagram is because they take this assessment and it's either like very confusing results or it's results that don't actually help. And that's because the assessments are built off of um, questions that try to make something concrete that's like very soft.
Yeah.
So like the Enneagram is a description of what motivates you, like the why for why you're doing this. And it's very difficult to test that in an assessment. So for example, it would be really easy if I were to ask you a behavioral question like, did you make your bed this morning? Yes, no, right? Like you would know with 100% certainty what that is. But if I asked you, why did you make your bed or not make your bed this morning?
Right.
And I mean, you'll be slamming some coffee Coke before you
and you give me my two choices and I don't like either of those choices.
Right.
Yeah.
So like it's intrinsically like the assessment is there because they're trying to support people in figuring it out. But really like at most the assessment should narrow it down to the top 3 and then the person taking it should go and read descriptions for all 3 and then see what kind of starts fitting and hold that really loosely.
Right.
So I wanted to start with that. But second is the Enneagram has allowed me to have so much more compassion for people who are so different from me.
Yeah.
Like the Enneagram says that there's 9 types of people. You're one of them. And the other 8 are like totally approaching the world from a completely different perspective. So when I was writing Staying Awake, or when I'm preaching, or when I'm creating pastoral care, I'm able to kind of sort through things like, okay, I identify as a 7, I lead with a 7. How would a 6 receive this news? Or how would a 3 receive this sermon? Or how could a 1 get something from this workshop? And it just lets me think through like what other needs other people would need met in anything that I'm creating. So, and that, by the way, is why I have poetry and testimonies in my book, because there are some types that won't connect to the prose, but they will connect to the poetry. And that's like what we're trying to offer here.
Yeah. That's great. No, I mean, I think I've experienced the same. Again, I'm probably, I don't Enneagram I don't Instagram my Enneagram stuff and I don't create any of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm probably dangerous. But what I found,
I have no doubt.
Yeah. What I found is that it's just been like, I hold all of these assessments and personality, like I hold them all lightly because I think there's something that they all allow us to explore about ourselves and other people. And I found for me, strengths and Enneagram have been the 2 that have been the most useful for me. And so I'm a 3, and I identify greatly.
Kidding.
Yeah. You're not
supposed. From the first 15 seconds, I was like, okay, I see. Now, I should say I had a deep hunch. I can never fully know until someone but I was like, oh, okay, yeah, got it. 3, got it, check. Yep, okay. Oh, what was that? You were 15 years old when you became head of the Presbyterian Church? Okay, yeah, I'm tracking.
That's the same thing that my brother, somebody was talking to my brother, like, did you think that your brother would hold the office of moderator? And he's like, be in charge of everybody and tell everybody what to do? Yeah.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah.
This seems on brand. It's totally on brand.
I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What I've been able to learn far later than any of us ever wants to learn about ourselves is where that becomes really dangerous and destructive, and relationships, because born out of some of the motivation that's not positive, have tricked me into, 3 is where we get our worth from what we do and what we achieve, and meritocracy, and the myth of all that you have to realize at some point is like, well, it's actually not all that, right? Is devastating. But I know when I start getting stressed out, my to-do list gets done really well, because I'm just like, well, I'm good because I checked 10 things off my list.
Right.
And those things when I talk with people about that, I'm like, that's what's helped me, especially because I've had my most conflicts with 9s who are unhealthy when they're in, like, I'm producing all this stuff coming at them and they're like, And I'm like, get things done. And they're like, stop doing things.
Like, shh. Like, too much.
So, yeah.
I think that's a really profound story for two reasons. So one of them is the Enneagram type always serves some purpose, right? Like, you wouldn't hold on to it if at some point in your life, being a 3 and getting a bunch of stuff done didn't help you in some kind of way. So like, it's not that your type is the enemy. It's that it's like, it should be a passenger on the bus and it's taking the steering wheel on the bus, right? But the second thing is that there are ways that we can try to escape ourselves, but at the end of the day, we always pay the cost of that. Like, so I've had many 3s tell me, I'll get a ton of stuff done in the day, feel kind of accomplished by the nighttime, and then the next morning, it's like the whole day is fresh, and I have to start off as if none of those accomplishments, I could have won a gold medal of the Olympics yesterday, and the day after, I'm like, I have to get back to training. And like, that is a relentless hamster wheel that
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm like, sorry if I'm like outing you on your podcast about this 3 energy, but like, that is a hamster wheel that does not end except for spiritual practice. And that's why we are doing what we're doing.
I mean, I have to tell myself out loud often to stop doing stuff, or to say, actually, if this doesn't get done, people are not going to die. Interesting. I'm not an actual doctor. People's lives are not like, the church office isn't an emergency room. It'll be okay. But I think it's very American, right? It's very this urgent, and I'm in the Silicon Valley where urgency is just everything, and so it's easy for me to not only buy into it, it's easy for me to thrive in that, and that's where I think I get into some trouble sometimes. It's like, now I didn't mean for you to turn into. So Tyler's going to have a coaching session now with Bruce about his 3-ness.
Well, it's so fascinating though, Bruce, because I got trained in the narrative Enneagram in Silicon Valley. And so here I have people from Google kind of saying, I mean, what a line that I liked a little bit ago that you said was like, intuitively, I know that something isn't going right in my life. And I don't know what it is, because I'm doing great at my job. I'm part of this like multi-billion-dollar company, but like something is like profoundly not okay, or profoundly not well with my soul. And the Enneagram doesn't necessarily help you fix that, but it helps you recognize some of those things so that you can take it to your spiritual work and really focus in on that.
We could talk about Enneagram forever, but I want to get to 2 things that you mentioned before that I have no idea what you're going to be talking about. So when I asked you, I was like, so what are some things you're interested in? You're like, you're super into whiteboards. What does that even mean? What does that even mean?
Listen,
like just a whiteboard that you write on. I was like, is that code for something that I'm too old to know
whiteboard.
about? I was like, what is it? I'm going to find out. What's a whiteboard?
It's a pill that people take at dance clubs. No, just kidding. It's like there's a coffee shop in Chicago that is lined with whiteboards from floor to ceiling, and then there's like little
just like the whiteboards,
dry erase whiteboards.
Okay.
Right? And I was like, this is what I want my entire life to be like, because I have like so many ideas and so many connections and so many like I'm an Enneagram 7 for folks who follow the Enneagram stuff. So it's like,
again, shocking.
Wait, I know this is going to blow your mind. Yeah. So like just writing stuff on the wall and really like externalizing the like carnival that is constantly going on in my brain is actually like a precursor to meditation for me, or a precursor to prayer. So it's like, I have to externalize these things. And I will like clear an entire forest's worth of paper if I use paper. So I just need to I have literally like whiteboard surfaces like pasted onto my walls, and then I just write down the ideas, and then I can find my time with God.
So do you are your whiteboards, like if I were to do a whiteboard, I would get the long black string tape and section off and
Who are you talking to? Long section. No.
So I'd be like, okay, here's my 5 ideas. Here's my blogging whiteboard. Here's my next book whiteboard.
No. That, because like my personality is built around making interesting connections. And so like if things are too siloed, it's like, but then we're losing the juice. So like,
well, if you put the whiteboards on Velcro, then you could move them around.
Wow. Okay,
I got
you
solutions.
Just opened up a whole can of my life. I'm going to disappear for a week and just figure out how to do that. I'll be back when things are better.
So while you're away, you're going to have to eat. So the other thing you mentioned to me, this is really funny to do, is like you're way into peanut butter. What is that? Like,
oh my gosh. What is there not to like? You know, it's
so
like,
so do you make your own?
Well, okay. When the situation demands. So I used to live in Ecuador, and peanut butter is not a thing in Ecuador. If anything, it's like a very rare ingredient that you use as a base of one particular soup, but it is not like a snack. And so I had my friend, I went to like a gringo like shop and got a little bit of peanut butter, and I had my Ecuadorian friend taste it, and they're like, it's salty and creamy. Yeah. Why would you want that? And I'm like, listen, like for the rest of my life, I will just be a defender of peanut butter.
Well, but creamy. So are you creamy or crunchy?
The whole,
any of them.
I don't discriminate. And my nut butters. Almond butter is also good, cashew butter, but it's just expensive. But yeah, I just, I'm a vegetarian, and like when push comes to shove, sometimes you just need like a quick source of protein that you can roll in a tortilla and then go and dance around your whiteboards and
roll in a tortilla. I mean, that makes total sense. There's not, but it's a strange combination of, man. Sure. What I do, because I must be a Labrador in my other. So I just take a big old spoon and try to make it into a ball, and then I just sit on the couch and just like slowly eat at it. It's so gross. I'm sure
that is like
the dog's looking at me going, "Dude, that's gross."
That is 1.5 steps away from putting it into like a Kong, and then like.
What's Dad doing? Oh, Mom just put peanut butter in the Kong, and he just does noise.
Mom was like, we needed to distract him for an hour, so we're just gonna give it to him. Like, this is 3rd one today.
He's not gonna eat dinner now.
He's not gonna eat dinner now, but like it's okay. At least I could get onto Zoom without being interrupted.
Oh my goodness! Who knew we were gonna go to Bruce eating a Kong off the living room floor?
It's the Holy Spirit. I'm telling you.
All right. Well, let's. We're almost out of time, so I want to get to the last few questions I always ask every guest. This has been so much fun. Thank you for being here. So, what are you listening to? What are you reading? And what are you watching?
Yeah. So I'm really into. So I'm the kind of person who listens to like a million songs one time, and then I find one that I like, and then I listen to that one song 1,000 times.
My youngest child, whose room is above ours, and just has a speaker loud enough that we just hear the bass. Oh, does that. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to.
And it's like, wow, this is what we signed up for. Yeah, so right now I am really into a song called Pray for Real, which has Chance the Rapper and Peter Cottontail, but it's just like this very chill, smooth vibe that's talking about prayer, but in a way that isn't so like high and holy. So I am nonstop listening to that.
That's on repeat, huh?
In between, like not like I have to wear headphones because my boyfriend's like, please,
Stop.
please, like, and then also of course Hamilton the musical, because there hasn't been a day since 2015 that I haven't listened to Hamilton the musical. So. There it is.
Are you a Lin-Manuel fan just in general, or that one? Yeah, I know. So our family is My family's a little spoiled, so all of my kids, my eldest identifies as non-binary, and I have two daughters. Then, and but we're a super musical family, musicals family, I should say.
Yes.
And so I always have to remind them, like, not every child gets to rank their musicals. This is not something that everybody gets to do. But we're super excited for In the Heights. It's coming out in just 2 months.
Oh my gosh.
Can't wait.
If I told you that I was listening to In the Heights songs to memorize them in preparation for the movie today, would I get kicked off this podcast?
Well, I would only be disappointed that you didn't already have them memorized.
I know, right? I was obsessed with it, and then it really dropped out when Hamilton came along.
Yeah, that's true.
And then it like resurged in my life. Like,
so good.
This is such a beautiful, and really, In the Heights is a musical about gentrification in a way that isn't heavy-handed at all. And I think that's such a beautiful vision for how we can do justice, like allowing art to create a world that we actually want to live in, and we want to fall in love with these characters. So that could be a whole nother podcast, but
Oh man. We fortunately got to see that a couple of times, and just, good. So good. Anyway. All right. So that's what you're listening to. What are you reading?
My book, to make sure I can remember the chapter titles. No, I'm reading a book called The Making of Asian America by Erica Lee. She's a Asian American historian, and I've really been amazed to see how the Asian American story, all the way from like Chinese exclusion, 1882, all the way through incarceration camps, 1940s, like all of those dynamics are very alive and present for Asian America still. And it's just not really, I mean, with the shootings that happened in Atlanta, like all of that has deep tectonic plates of cultural appropriation and cultural abuse that have been against Asian Americans. So I'm obsessed with that.
Is that something that you've always known about, kind of up here, and are now kind of diving in, or is this something you've been involved with much more? I was an Asian American Studies major in college, and because the school that I went to, we were able to, and Filipinos are super. How do I say? Like, we're always like, we're actually the first Asians that got here because we have Manila men that jumped off in Louisiana. Yeah, right. So we're always like, yeah, we know, but we're really the first. So anyway, there's all that internal Asian stuff, but. Well, I mean, I think that there's been an interesting time now. I mean, was that something that what you were taught early on? I mean, did you have to get into it yourself? I mean, did your where did that identity piece come in for you?
I really felt like, so my dad is from Hong Kong. My mom is a white woman from Minnetonka, Minnesota.
Minnetonka.
And I really felt like my family system prepared me as an Asian American. Prepared me as a child understanding of Asian America. And then once I left home, it was kind of my job to become an adult in Asian America. So growing up, of course, I knew about dim sum. Of course, I knew about Chinese New Year. Of course, I knew about anime, like all of the things that a child in Asian America would know. But in terms of like critical race theory, in terms of history, in terms of like representation and understanding why we never see Asian Americans in media, all of that stuff came when I was an adult.
Yeah. It's man, there's a lot of stuff going on. But all right, so last question is, what are you watching?
I just finished watching what is it called? Unorthodox.
Oh yeah.
Which is a 4-part really interesting thing on not Hasidic. Is it Hasidic? A Jewish community in New York. So lots of really interesting themes about gender, sexuality, finding a new way. I don't know if I totally agree with all of their power analysis, but it just nonetheless, it was really, really good. Oh, and have you seen Crip Camp? The movie Crip Camp? It's on Netflix.
Yeah. So it's on my list. I've not seen it yet, but everybody was telling me, like friends that I trust have said, yes, you need to watch this.
Like I finished it. I had to watch it in 3 sittings because of how like intense it was. But I really, really appreciate the artistry that went into that documentary. So
I'm one of those people that, so I have a my middle kid is a political science and Asian American studies major in college, and so she's right now in all these like, let's watch this and let's watch, and I'm like, can I just watch the new Godzilla King Kong movie?
What about Avengers?
Can I just watch The Irregulars?
Amazing.
Because there are times like I still have never watched. I don't know if you remember the movie Precious.
Oh yeah.
Like I still can't watch it. I'm just like I just feel like there's so much emotional investment, and I feel like there's just like, so I'm totally that. But it was like, how about we watch the Avengers series?
Yeah, like I want to read about some of this stuff. I don't know if I want to watch some of the trauma stuff until after COVID is done. But then again, it's I think it's so interesting because I'm seeing media become both like more willing to show trauma and less willing to show trauma. So it's like super intense stuff, or like Great British Bake Off, where it's just like everything is frosting. So yeah.
Have you seen the British flower arranging one?
Oh, have I seen the British flower arranging one? Only 2 episodes, but yeah, I it's like we're just talking about flowers, you know, like yes, Minneapolis is burning down, but flowers, you know, like
look what I did with this cornucopia.
Yeah. And honestly, like a lot of folks from marginalized communities that I pastor with are like, I really need that as just a buffer in my life. So I'm not shaming that at all, but I just think it's funny that there's such a bifurcation there.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Okay. Well, cool. Awesome. Well, that is it for today. But before we leave, why don't you tell folks how folks can connect with you, drop us all the links and handles and all that kind of stuff, and let folks. So how do we connect with you?
Yes. So all the links to buy my book, this Staying Awake, The Gospel for Changemakers, all of those links are on tylersit.com. You can find me on Instagram at tylersit, and I'm on Facebook, tylersit. And I do have a Twitter, but I'm never on it because it destroys my soul. So follow me on Instagram and we'll go from there. But
awesome. Cool. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to this episode of BRC and Friends. Thanks again to Tyler Sit for hanging out today. Be sure to pick up his book, Staying Awake, The Gospel for Changemakers. Remember, in addition to going to your preferred podcast space, you want to subscribe, review, and rate this podcast. You can also watch on YouTube and Instagram. As always, you can connect with me on all of the socials at B Reyes-Chow. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode of BRC and Friends.